Hey, this is Phil from SmilingGardener.com, and we're talking about biointensive gardening in this series of lessons here. Last time I talked about how planting intensively is going to get you higher yields and offer some benefits to the soil as well. And I want to continue talking about planting today. The next biointensive method is companion planting, which means a couple of different things. What they talk about with companion planting is just how planting certain plants together can be beneficial to at least one or sometimes both of the plants. And you can find charts online. I even have one somewhere on my website that give all kinds of rules for companion planting. That shouldn't be treated as hard science because I believe it's more complex than that. It can be a good starting point for when you're laying out your garden to just think about which plants kind of harm each other and which seem to get along okay. But we can go even further than that to think of how plants can help each other. And in that case, you could even call it intercropping, and polycultures goes into more detail of planting many plants together that can benefit each other. So I'm sitting here among some bumblebees and mosquitoes underneath my pear tree, and every time I plant a fruit tree, I really think about planting things around it that can be beneficial to it and beneficial to each other. And I'm not sure what you can see here. One thing I plant quite a lot of is comfrey. And it's a highly medicinal plant, one of the most beneficial plants for the garden, also very opportunistic. So once you've planted it, you have it, and it's going to start spreading. But as long as you get out there, I come once a month and I cut this comfrey right down and I use it as a mulch in the garden, and it's just such a beautiful thing to have around. The bees love it. I've seen hummingbirds today on it. It's just a really nice thing to have around. So comfrey I have here is benefiting the garden. Garlic I have somewhere. I think I'm kind of sitting on some garlic, which I always plant around all of my trees because it's just such a nice thing to have around there. I plant a row of garlic bulbs around a tree and it stops grasses from coming in to the tree. I also have out here some blackberries that I dug up in the wild, that I've planted blackberries and raspberries all around the edge of my garden so that it acts as a barrier to animals that might want to get into my garden. It's becoming thicker and thicker and working more and more as a barrier. And so I like that. When I dug that up, here's some garlic scapes in here, I don't know if you can see them. When I dug up the blackberries, there were some grasses that I brought with them that were just in the wild with them, some kind of grasses. And that's another thing that could be really useful when you're planting a garden. Think about what grows naturally in the wild, in the native habitat with those plants, and plant them at the same time because there's a good chance they benefit each other. So that's intercropping. Polyculture is a very similar thing, but it's where you plant, could be 5 or 10 or 20 different plants all together. And even if you're planting in rows, you plant them all together rather than a monoculture, and you just get the benefits of having this diversity there. Now I will say, I probably have 50 different plants in this garden, and I like to have the diversity. But there's also something to be said for if you just do a few plants very well and you can grow them very nutritiously, there's something to be said for that. It makes things easier for you. And like I said a couple of videos ago, in Peru, in some tribes still get the majority of their calories from potatoes. Now they'll have many different varieties of potatoes, but still they do a really good job of growing potatoes there, and that's okay. The thing I like about planting many different plants is that you're just going to have more diversity, which is beneficial to the garden. Probably more diversity is beneficial for your health in some ways. So there's something to be said for doing a few plants really well, but also having some diversity in the garden. Related to this is crop rotation. I don't know if you can see behind me. Back there I have my tomatoes and some peppers and some eggplants. They're all part of the tomato family. Last year I had something else there, I don't remember what, but every 3 years at least I try to rotate so I'm not growing the same plant family in the same place. And that just makes it so that pests are going to have a harder time finding those plants if I move them all around, especially pests that live in the soil over the winter. And also you're going to be getting a different root depth on the plants. They might take up some different nutrients, and it's going to be, most people agree, it's going to be better for soil health overall. Now there are a small number of people who talk about how plant rotation is not always necessary if you have really healthy soil. And certainly we can see historically there have been some farmers who have grown the same plants for hundreds and hundreds of years in the same place without rotating them, as long as they're always working at returning the manure to the soil and just returning all crop residue to the soil and doing a good job of improving the soil. So overall, I don't think crop rotation is necessary once you have a healthy soil, but it still is generally taught as being a best practice in the garden. So that's a little bit about how to plan your garden. Down below I'm going to link to just a little bit more information, another lesson I did on this, on how to plan your garden for health when you're growing food. And if you are in the full academy, we get into more detail on that in month 10. And if you're in the light academy, we get into a little bit of detail on that in the last month, month 6. And for everyone else, down below I'll link to that video, and then you can ask me questions there on these topics of crop rotation and intercropping and companion planting. So that is all for today.